My wife left while I was caring for my dying father, only to return after I inherited millions. I'm 36 years old, married for 8 years, and with 2 children. The sole son of my ailing father, I have been deeply involved in his care. He has struggled for many years with kidney problems, though over the past 2 to 3 years, his health precipitously declined, which has necessitated his receiving dialysis 2 times a week. While in the past he could manage, in the past year, he frequently asked me to accompany him. His strength is declining day by day. I thus established a pattern to escort him every time for dialysis. I just could not bear the idea of leaving him all to himself in such a bad state. His dialysis appointments are on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Saturday works well for me since it's my day off, but for Wednesdays, I arranged with my boss to leave work early and make up the hours later that night after returning home. Having worked at my company for 10 years, my boss recognizes my dedication and loyalty, so granting this special arrangement wasn't an issue for him. However, the challenge came from my wife. When she found out that I would now have to take my dad for dialysis twice a week, she threw a fit. Whereas she had never complained when I took him occasionally before, now that I was fully committed to this responsibility, she couldn't hide her feelings anymore. She said that she didn't see any sense in devoting so much time to my father. Whatever I did, I thought my father would never be proud of me. For a little background information, my father had been running a merchandising business that was quite successful and had managed to gain a good life. He wanted me to take over the family business, but my passions lay elsewhere. I wanted to do something with technology and was really interested in coding and software development. Upon completion of my high school studies, my dad encouraged me to take up courses in business or management, but I opted to study software engineering instead. He was supportive, at first, on the condition that I would join his company afterwards. Immediately after graduation, however, I secured a job in a well-established technology firm, which didn't augur too well with him. He would frequently ask me to come work with him, but I just kept delaying it. After I got married, he once again inquired if I would join his business, and with a firm tone, I refused this time. This angered him so much that he said he would donate all of his riches to charity and that I wouldn't get any of it. Despite that, I stood my ground. By then, I was well paid and had acquired my own car and house by the time I was 29 years. Old! I was secure in the knowledge that I could provide my future, sans his money. From then on, our relationship started going downhill. My mother died from a cardiac arrest 5 years ago. It devastated my father. Since I had left at 17 for college and started life alone after getting employed, our family bond had already been stretched trivially. Mom was the only companion that Dad had, and her loss was huge for him. This tragedy brought us closer to each other, and I started visiting him more frequently, mostly with my kids, to spend time with him. Eventually, he decided to step down from his company and placed it in a trust to manage. My wife was never close to my parents, especially while my mother was alive. She barely liked visiting them, claiming my mom was too involved in our lives, that they didn't get along. But when my father threatened to disown me, my wife went on the front burner, belittling my parents as mean and unreasonable. I told her to keep her opinions about my relationship with my parents to herself, but she continued to say that this could affect our future, especially the children. I reassured her that our future and our children's future was secure irrespective of my father's wealth, but she just would not look at it that way. Things recently came to a head when she discovered I would have to take my dad for dialysis twice a week. I tried explaining to her that he has no one else. He lost both of his parents long ago, and though he has an older brother, he seldom comes since he lives on the other side of town. Daddy has grown so lonely since Mother died, and I just cannot leave him at this moment. Unfortunately, my wife has refused to understand this and lately has made my life miserable. Every other Saturday, my wife would come up with some or other plans, whether it be a party at home, thorough cleaning of the house, taking the kids out, or even something as insignificant as going out to buy groceries. I have tried explaining to her that she can schedule anything she wishes for Sundays, since Saturdays I need to take my dad for dialysis. However, she still goes on and makes plans, later giving me a hard time about how late I reach or skip some activities. Many times, I have to rush down to pick up my dad and drive him to the dialysis center. By the time that's done, I drive him back home and rush down back to confront her sarcasms and frustrations. This issue is not only confined to Saturdays, but the same thing happens with her on Wednesday evenings too. I promised my employer that anything I miss working would be made up later in the evening after returning from dialysis, but my wife always seems to have something planned that complicates things. It seems like nearly every Wednesday evening she goes out to see family, old friends, or some random event and then leaves me to take care of the children. I'm having to juggle work responsibilities along with cooking and feeding the kids. All this after an exhausting day at work and a visit to the dialysis center. I know this is getting lengthy, but it illustrates how difficult my situation has become. My dad has suggested several times that he could go to the center with a nurse since he sees me constantly rushing and checking my watch. I drop him home and don't even take a moment to breathe before heading out again. Even when I go to pick him up, I ask him to be ready and waiting outside before I reach there. My dad has a full-time nurse and a caretaker who takes care of him, but I still feel guilty about not being able to spend enough time with him. This drive from his house to the dialysis center takes about 30 minutes. I used to enjoy chatting with him during that ride, reminiscing about the good old days when I was a child. However, with my wife's constant frustrations, I find myself more concerned with rushing back home. Most of the time, I'm speeding through traffic, taking shortcuts, and overtaking other vehicles just to shorten the drive. This is the only time I get to spend with my dad, and I don't want to jeopardize that by suggesting he go along with the nurse instead. I have responsibilities as a son, but it's becoming increasingly difficult for me to deal with my wife. Things seem to get progressively worse each day. She is trying everything she can to put me off spending time with him. She says it's useless since he has already deleted me from his will and given all of his money to some charity. According to her, she doesn't find any logical reason to waste my time on him. I can't really understand her way of thinking. Do we do everything based on our profit and loss? What about kids whose parents are not rich or are in trouble? Should they abandon their parents simply because there's nothing material to gain? After months of listening to her complaints, I finally pointed out that she wouldn't inherit anything from her own parents either. So why does she visit them regularly? This set her off completely. She exclaimed that her parents had done much more for her than my father ever did for me. They supported her in everything, unlike my father, who disowned me for choosing a different path. She said I should never compare her parents to mine. Unfortunately, these arguments have become a regular occurrence in our home, especially after I returned from dialysis on Wednesdays and Saturdays. With each episode, the deliberations become even fierier than the previous. Though she used to argue with me behind closed doors, nowadays I hear her screaming and shouting at me in front of the children. It's even worse, since I have heard her talk negatively about my dad in front of them, turning them against both him and me. When I tried to intervene, another heated argument emerged between us. The fights have become routine in my daily life, and any day we do not fight, I feel something is missing. However, the next day, she usually comes back more aggressive than ever. I almost gave up trying to engage her. Instead of responding or yelling back, I just turn a blind eye and pretend she does not exist at all. I feel trapped. I just can't leave my father because of her. I don't care that he took me out of his will. He did so because I didn't accept his company. It would have been sad on his part to leave the business he struggled to build his whole life to a trust. He was within his rights to disown me for causing him so much pain. Sometimes, I wonder if this is my karma acting up on me due to how I hurt my dad. In the meantime, he is getting frailer and can hardly walk without support. I used to save time by asking him to come out so I could help him into the car, but nowadays I take my time. I go inside to carefully support him as he walks to the car and later help him settle into bed. He is also feeling shortness of breath, so I make sure we go at his pace. Driving, I am more careful to avoid speeding or increasing his heart rate. The fact that we will arrive home late no longer matters since speeding has not improved the situation. I aimed to always keep my dad comfortable and happy. On the other hand, my laid-back attitude seems to have heightened tensions within the house. Just yesterday, she told me that I needed to choose between her and my father. I tried explaining that given Dad's condition, he likely wouldn't be around much longer. Her response was curt. In that case, you need to make your choice wisely. Someone who will be with you forever, or someone who is going to die soon. That felt incredibly insensitive. I told her I'd rather choose my dad over someone who is so selfish and cruel towards a dying man. She packed her bags and left in response. I didn't stop her when she did. I thought she needed some time to cool off, and honestly speaking, I could use some space from her too. In her absence, I had to manage the house, look after the kids, take care of my dad, and keep up with work. Surprisingly, without her around, I feel relief and a sense of relaxation. A couple of days ago, I received divorce papers from her. Yes, I kind of knew that it would happen one day, but didn't really expect that it would come so soon. I was shocked at first, but felt a deep happiness and a sense of relief. I didn't call her, I just signed the papers and sent them back. In return, I was surprised that she was not even requesting custody of the children then, which was my main concern. She didn't want them at all. When she got the papers, she called me furious and wanted to know how I could sign them without discussing it with her first. It was kind of amusing because she then passed the phone to her mother, who proceeded to yell at me for not trying to reconcile with my wife instead of just signing divorce papers. I found it funny. She wanted a divorce and I simply obliged. It was great to get rid of her without any drama. I even hinted that she had abandoned our kids and that she didn't want them. She shot back that I could have all my assets, including the kids, because she didn't want any part of it. Her mother said her daughter was still young and didn't want the burden of children. I told them it was all right with me. I was happy to have my kids with me. It's really a relief, but deep inside, I do fear how much they miss their mom, especially the little one. Managing everything on my own at work is hard, but I hope to get through it. Recently, I have moved in with my dad, along with my children. It turned out to be a great decision. Thanks to everyone for their wonderful suggestions. Living with Dad has been beneficial for all of us. He enjoys the company of my kids, and they love spending time with their grandpa. My dad has a full-time caregiver who can also help look after the children under his supervision. What a win-win situation! I like seeing my dad playing and laughing with them, as it is a merry sight of enjoyment on their part. Little did she know that trying to make my life miserable through divorce, she actually led me into a happier situation. She believed I wouldn't be able to manage all my responsibilities, taking care of the kids, my dad, maintaining the house, and working. But all's well that ends well, and I am certainly having the last laugh. The divorce indeed worked as a boon for me. Update 3. Unfortunately, I have some sad news. My dad passed away last week in his sleep. He went to bed happy and content after spending time playing with my children and never woke up again. The doctor mentioned that he died peacefully. His nurse and caregiver also said that my dad was much happier after I moved in with him. This seemed to extend his life during those last months. Before I came, he was at the verge of giving up. It is very painful to lose the only parent, but knowing he spent his last months in joy really comforts me. Even my children are regretful for the loss of their grandfather, but they will never forget what their grandfather used to teach them. Stop crying and live realistically, because life stops for nobody. Hearing them express such wisdom makes me feel proud. They truly are my strength during this difficult time. There's one more surprising piece of news following my dad's passing. His lawyer contacted me to come to his office to discuss my dad's will. I initially thought it wasn't necessary since Dad had already told me he left all his wealth to a trust, so I assumed everything would proceed smoothly. I even asked if I needed to vacate Dad's house, thinking it might also go to charity. The lawyer laughed and told me just to come by. Upon arrival, members of the trust were present, for the lawyer had called them too. He began reading the will, and tears of emotion overwhelmed me as I heard Dad had actually made me his heir. All his business, his house, and his riches were for me. I asked the lawyer if this had happened recently, in case it was after I started taking care of him. He smiled and said that I'd always been his heir and that nothing ever changed in the will. I immediately started crying because I knew my dad never truly abandoned me. Perhaps he threatened to disown me as a means of getting me to take over his business and carry on with his legacy. Still crying, the lawyer comforted me, telling me how proud my father was that I did not fold under the pressure of giving up on my passion. He admired that I would pass up generational wealth in favor of what made me happy. The attorney told me that now I am the decision maker of the business, and if I want, I can take it back from the trust and do business myself. I am seriously thinking of taking action. I have always followed my passion, and my dad supported me in his own way. Now, this was my chance to repay him by reclaiming the business from the trust and taking it to the height he had in mind. I came home and informed the kids about Grandpa's will. He had also set aside some money for them, which they would receive once they reached the age of 18. Today, we went to the grave with some flowers, and we sat there in silence for a little while. This is a really emotional time for me. Update 4. A month after the passing of my father, it felt like the ants returned once they saw the sugar candy. I began taking over his business and engaging in community service work. First, I resigned from my job to fully dedicate myself to the business. My children and I decided to move into my parents' house. They feel a strong connection with their grandpa in this home, filled with my childhood memories. I didn't want to leave it behind. With the news of inheriting my father's substantial wealth, I started receiving many visitors, long-lost relatives, friends, and neighbors. However, the most unexpected visitor was my ex-wife and her parents.